Chapters 11 through 16 of Mark's Gospel zero in on the narrative of Jesus' life in the days leading up to his crucifixion. These chapters are full of deep meaning for the original readers, Christians suffering persecution in Rome, and they're full of rich meaning for us as well. In this session, we're going to take a deeper dive into chapter 14, and we're going to begin with verses 1 through 7. Let's look there now. Chapter 14, verse 1. It was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him, for they said, "Not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people." While he, that's Jesus, was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, he sat at a table, and a woman came with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment of nard. She broke it open, the jar, and poured the ointment out on his head. But some were there who said to one another in anger, "Why was this ointment wasted in this way? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and the money given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She's performed a good service for me. For you will always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish, but you will not always have me." To a suffering audience in Rome who has read just a few chapters before about John's untimely death, and who has perhaps just witnessed Peter's untimely death as a part of this Roman persecution, and who may be facing their own death, they hear Jesus in this story saying, "Am I worth you pouring your life out for? Am I worth it, even if others might see it as a waste?" You know, a denarii was a day's wage. So let's call this jar of ointment a $35,000 jar of perfume, worth a year's salary, poured out in an instant to anoint a king facing death. And Jesus looks around and says, "Am I that precious to you? Have I given you so much, something of such value, that I'm thoughtlessly worth the pouring out of your precious life?" You know, Luke chapter 7 in his gospel shares another story of another woman who pours out another precious jar on Jesus, not on his head, but on his feet. And she was a great sinner, and everyone in town knew it. And she wipes his feet with her hair. And those who sit around and watch it are also astounded and also don't understand the sacrifice she's made. But Jesus turns to them, the Pharisees in this instance, and says this: "Those who have been forgiven much love much." And when we aren't able to pour ourselves out for Jesus, perhaps it's because we fail to appreciate the value of him pouring himself out for us. You know, there's another way that Jesus is treated in this narrative, and it's there for intentional contrast. As chapter 14 continues, it's not a jar, but it's Judas. Let's look at it in chapter 14, verses 10 and 11. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. When they heard it, they were greatly pleased and promised to give him money. So he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. Did Judas make that decision right as he saw the woman pour out this costly alabaster jar? We'll never know. But the choice is clear to Mark's readers. Either you honor the costliness of the sacrifice through the pouring out of your life, or you sell Jesus out for personal gain. You pour yourself out, or you sell him out. And it's your choice. And the choice is made so much easier when you realize that Jesus has first poured himself out for you. And the rest of Mark's gospel is going to tell us that story. Of course, we know what that looks like. That's the crucifixion. But the story continues in chapter 14 with the story of the Last Supper, the Passover meal, celebrated on the first day of the week-long festival of the Passover, celebrating the last time God had delivered Israel from bondage to an enemy. It was slavery in Egypt that the Passover was celebrating. And that deliverance was accomplished through the sacrificial death of the Passover lamb, who shed blood on the doorpost and the lintel of their homes, saved them from the coming angel of death. The angel of death passed by the household, passed over them, rescuing them from death when it saw the shed blood of the lamb. It was the principal annual feast of Israel, and every male was required to attend it once a year. It was at this feast that Jesus ate the Last Supper with his disciples, at this Passover feast when he instituted another feast, celebrating a greater Passover, also commemorating deliverance from death, but not through the shed blood of an animal, but through his own blood. That's actually the meaning and message of communion that we celebrate every Sunday as we worship together. And we see that in chapter 14, verse 22 and 23. Let's look at it together. While they were eating the Passover, he took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to them and said, "Take, this is my body." My body is the emphasis, not the broken body of a lamb, but my broken body. Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and all of them drank from it, and he said to them, "This is my blood, not the blood of a lamb, but the blood of a new covenant, poured out for you and for many, which celebrates a new deliverance, one greater from bondage to Egypt, one that delivers you from sin and death, accomplished by Jesus for," and this is important, deserters. Deserters. Jesus says to this woman in Luke 7, those who've been given much, love much. And in the narrative of chapter 14, 3 times, we see that the disciples deserted Jesus on this Passover evening and his crucifixion and death that would follow. And Mark's putting that there intentionally for his original audience as they face their own wavering, real life wavering of following Jesus into the cost of suffering and hardship, where at times we walk away, God never walks away from us. And in fact, he lays himself down, even for Judas and for the disciples who would desert him. We see it in chapter 14, verse 18. As Jesus says of Judas at the Passover meal, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." And lest the disciples and Mark's original audience fail to put themselves there as well, there's a Judas place in all of our heart. Jesus appropriates that desertion to the rest of the disciples as he's on the Mount of Olives that same night, chapter 14, verse 27. Look, Jesus says to them, "You will all become deserters, all of you. For it's written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered." And then at the end of the arrest narrative of Jesus, which follows in the coming verses, in chapter 14, verse 50, we see, "But let the scriptures be fulfilled, and all of them deserted him and fled." I want to leave you with this. The one who's been forgiven much loves much. And the great value and cost of Jesus' forgiveness given to deserters has the potential to so fill our hearts in such a way that we're actually willing to wade into pouring ourselves out as well on the offering of his life as he's offered his life to us. All right, if you're engaging with this in a small group setting, I encourage you to talk about it now. God bless.